Okay, I guess we're ready to kick off our Vietnam rules coverage. Now, I noticed something, and I was kind of vaguely aware of this. I think I had decided to. It's so hard to tell because this game is always on my radar anytime that I'm looking at something heavy. And I mean, I was doing the standard debate. It was this or DAC, you know? Like, I know the rules to this better. But someone else is doing instructional, and they may be doing a playthrough as well, which would really kind of suck because kind of stomping on each other, me on him more than anything else. I would guess that his instructional is probably better than mine, just because it looks like he's giving examples of play and stuff like that, as opposed to what I'm going to do, which is read to you from this rule book. I gave you the overview. That's probably enough, but here's the problem. I don't know the campaign rules well enough, so I got to do them. So we're going to go into details that I didn't catch in the overview of the core gaming system. Sequence of play. So in each game turn, the U.S. is going to get a certain number of points of stuff. Now, in the campaign game, they buy those points using the campaign game rules. In the scenarios, they have them set for the scenario. They may have lost planes, air mobile, stuff like that, but if they didn't lose them, they get them again for both of the turns, in a given season. Then the U.S. is allowed, as well as the NLF afterwards, to designate that units are just set up in their hold and patrol positions. Quite often, this is the case of just leaving those markers on the board because you've got them where you want them. Yeah, you went and did a hold and secure operation or whatever, and you go there. Then you're able to do security operations to clear the roads, and you can do strategic movement. You can also do naval movement, which is sort of a form of strategic movement. You go from a port to either another port or to a landing beach. Now, what qualifies as a landing beach? Damned if I know. It is not a specific terrain type that I know of. And I absolutely have to get rid of. It's colder downstairs, the jacket that I'm wearing, and I know I'm going to be taking breaks. So I'm going to cut the camera for a bit. The next thing that happens is the operations segment. Now, strategic movement for the U.S., strategic movement is an operation that you can do at this point to rapidly move your pieces along the road for the most part. You're allowed to leave the road, but you only have normal movement points off-road. The NLF has strategic movement as well, but they do it as normal operations. The operation, and the U.S. can do their strategic movement as normal operations too. So if you notice, oh man, there's a hole, I need to plug it, you can do that. You can do a security operation. This is just basically this section of the special operations and the strategic movement is largely, especially the strategic movement phase, is largely a way for the U.S. to set things up in a better defensive posture, or maybe to move some support pieces, but generally it's the defensive posture. Then we go into that regular feel of the game where the NLF player gets to decide who goes first, and they can take an operation if they have something they want to do, or they can force the U.S. to go. And if the U.S. doesn't go and the NLF is happy with the board situation, which is often the case, not the U.S. not going, the NLF is often happy with the board, they can just say, fine, you know, my pieces started out, spread out, they're good. I don't have an offensive planned. Okay, for any given operation, the U.S. chooses usually a target hex for the operation type, units that are going to be involved in it. The target hex for a search and destroy is presumably the target location of the unit. Others, the target hex may not really matter. The U.S. player is allowed to allocate any naval air support, and they can also throw free fire zones on the map. They'll get to put them on at other times during the operation, and those free fire zones stay for the remainder, I believe, of the season. I may be mistaken about that. Okay. But you get penalized for having them on at the end of the season, so you can't remove them before that. Then you're allowed to move your units that are involved in the operation. If you walk through an enemy-occupied hex, there's something called an incidental attack. The enemy might force you to attack them. And the U.S. is allowed to commit resources, air mobile, riverines, whatever, in order to enhance their capabilities. Now, if it's a U.S. operation, the U.S. player gets the opportunity to use some of their firepower to drop interdiction markers on the board. And then NLF units, VC units specifically, have a chance to roll a die and see if they can get out of the area. I don't think that supply conduits can do this, but everything else can. Supply conduits don't have a movement allowance, so that wouldn't be surprising. After that, both players have the opportunity to drop interdiction markers by using firepower. And you're only allowed to use your firepower once in each round of the operation. So, if you have an artillery piece, you can fire that artillery piece once during each round of the operation. So, if you use it for interdiction, you won't use it for combat support, etc. But you can use it in other rounds of the same operation. It's committed to that operation. Okay. Then if you were still, I believe, adjacent to the enemy player, to the target hex, well, there are more than one target. If you're still adjacent to a target unit, you're allowed to attack it. Again, this is the search and destroy flavor mission. Others change that a little bit. And you conduct the combat, you might get a pursuit result. After the combat, the defending units are allowed to retreat based on their movement point allowance, and this is why you'd interdict just before you fire, or just before you fight. And then the U.S. player is allowed to move its units, well, not quite yet. The U.S. player is allowed to activate any defensive reserves at the same time, and they can bring them into play to help defend a unit that's being picked on or whatever. Then there's the pursuit phase, where the phasing units are moved based on their combat result, their pursuit modifier and their combat result. And the U.S. player can throw offensive reserves into this and bring more active units into play. And now, wherever the retreating units, basically the defending units are the retreating units always. Wherever the retreating units go, if they stack with other units, those other units are now targets of the operation as well. And you can start activating units to fight those, even if they split off and play somewhere else or whatever. At the end of the operation, at the end of a round of an operation, you remove all the interdiction markers, and then you go back up here to see if there's any combat left. And if there's no combat at any point during an operation, during the combat segment, the operation's done. If you're in a hold and secure, you drop into that formation, the hold or secure formation. I think that's largely the flavor of operations, but there's things like movement that are important. You can move stacks together. Friendly units have no effect. When you leave an enemy-occupied hex, you have to pay 2 movement points in general to leave it. There's some unit... if you're leaving an enemy zone of control, and most units have a zone of control in the surrounding hexes, you have to pay 1 extra movement point unless they're in patrol formation, in which case you pay 2. That may be a zero-strength political section that you're moving out of the zone of control of. Here we have it. All units with ground combat strengths greater than 0 have a zone of control, except for ARVN battalions. Now, I don't remember if the regular ARVN units are battalions. I don't think they are. Oh, yes, they are. Well, no, that's not a regular unit. No, those are brigades. Okay. So battalions are kind of their excess, not excess, but they're supplemental units or whatever. They might be part of a division, but they also have some that are just loose. Okay. You will have to pay the cost of any interdiction markers in the hex that you're in, I believe, to leave. We'll see that a little later. Once again, if you enter a hex containing enemy non-target units, it's written correctly, but it's written opposite of how I started the sentence. The enemy can force you to attack. This is an incidental attack. You do combat odds. You can throw in artillery and air support that's committed to the operation, and you determine casualties. But there will not be a pursuit or retreat from this. If defending units remain, the moving units have to leave the hex, and they have to pay that 2 extra movement points. You can't enter an enemy hex unless you can move out of it. So you have to have the movement points to leave. Ineffective ARVN units cannot force an incidental attack. ARVN units become ineffective through the political design. All right. There is also strategic movement. Now, for U.S. strategic movement, you spend no movement points as long as you move along roads. But you use your movement point allowance to leave zone of control, for interdiction, and also if you want to move off-road. You can continue to move along the road once you have no movement points. You cannot use air mobile or riverine movement for this. For the NLF, when they do strategic movement, they get triple their movement allowance. Now, they're doing a strategic movement operation, though, which has certain specific limits. And I believe that means you cannot enter, units may enter or pass through enemy zone of controls in enemy-occupied hexes. They may not end their movement in an enemy-occupied hex. They're not allowed to attack, but I believe they're able to be forced into an incidental attack. Anyhow, otherwise it would be unreasonable. You could slip through the enemy. Naval transport, the U.S. Units can spend their movement point allowance to move to a port hex, and then once they reach a port, this does not say anything about incidental attacks happening. So maybe when you strategic move, you can't be ambushed. I feel like that would be wrong. Anyway, incidental attacks can happen along the way. That's specific in naval transport. The port may be within an enemy zone of control, but may not be enemy occupied. And then you move from that port to a port or landing beach not occupied by an enemy unit. Now, I don't know what the rules on landing beaches are. Are they the yellow? They may be these yellow things around the sea area. I do not see that spelled out there. It may be spelled in the map thing, but I think that's what it is. It's these little yellow twinker bottles indicate landing beaches. All right. Terrain effects on movement, I've explained that. There's a terrain effects chart that it explains that there's 2 different types of movement classes, ground and mechanized. It's based on the type of unit that you have, although that can be different. So headquarters are the particularly interesting one. The U.S. controlled and NVA augmented headquarters are considered mech. There are no augmented headquarters for the NVA, so I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It may give them some improvement that, like if the whole division is augmented, the headquarters becomes it. Basically, I look on these and there's no difference on them, so I don't know. We'll see if augmentation explains something there. Roads are used as their own separate movement point allowances as standard in wargaming. These are the foot types. They'll pay the foot movement. There's units that are permanently air mobile, which have the option to be foot units or air mobile units in each round of the operation. You can also air mobilize units by spending helicopter points to do that. There's hexside crossing for rivers and such not. The terrain that the force uses that the defender's in combat, which is the defender's choice out of multiple terrains in general, is a modifier on the combat results table. And also, if you attack across an escarpment, you'll be halved in ground combat strength for each unit individually as they're going across it. Likewise, non-amphibious units attacking across water hexsides are also halved. Now, water hexsides are not just rivers, I don't believe. They are this, which has this black line going across it. You can fight across them. They're not prohibited. They're just tougher. It's black line rivers, tough rivers. Let's talk a little bit about borders. So, borders are generally going through the hexes like this, rather than between them. Units on an international border are on whichever side the owning player desires. Units on or adjacent to a border can be attacked without violating neutrality. So you can walk into the border, let's not go there because that's disputed, and attack somebody all the way across the border. You keep going across, but these little dashes here are disputed borders. You're able to count the hexes adjacent to that hex's border hexes. So things are a little blurry there. ARVN units on core zone boundaries are considered on whichever side the NLF wants them to be. On regional boundaries, they're considered the region of the defending player's choice for artillery free fire distinctions. And the U.S. decides which region NLF units are when computing pacification. However, if you're on an SVN national border, you are considered to be outside the country, with the exception of if you're on a cultivated hex or a hex that contains a town, which are more important places, and the U.S. should be able to interdict them a little bit easier. Let me swap batteries and I'll be back on. Try not to repeat too much stuff that I did in the initial intro. I've been doing it so far. That overview is really what you need to understand the game, like the base flow of the game, and to understand the playthrough. This is really an addendum to that, and I'd rather not waste my voice and your time. So the search and destroy operation I've largely mentioned already. You can do one operation per turn. You get marked with little markers, all that stuff. Okay. We've already gone through the sequence of play for this, and the fact that in combat, if combat happens, the units that fought remain in the operation. Units that did not fight are out of the operation. Usually, there aren't multiple battles in each round of an operation, but it can happen. Units that fought, that did not fight, stop being target units as well, which is important. The concept of alert. I did not go over the points for alert. So, alert movement takes place after there's interdiction done. Anything with target units in it after alert movement is completed will now be a target hex. The alert movement point allowance, you roll a die and add it to the foot movement point cost of the target hex. And that's how many movement points the VC unit has. Which means if they're in bad terrain and close to easy to move through terrain, they can just fly out of there. In general, if they're in an area of one type of terrain cost, it means that they can probably move a hex if it's bad terrain. And if it's kind of clear terrain, that die roll is going to come and take effect for them. So like clear terrain, foot movement cost is 1. So you can move pretty far if you're caught out in the open, which may mean interdiction is more important. But if you start looking at some of things like mountains, well, you have 3 base movement points in the mountains, but, you know, your die roll is less likely to give you an extra hex. In general, the U.S., in order to catch the NLF units, does have to interdict the hex that they're in. The NVA doesn't get to alert. Alert only happens in the first round of the operation. You don't get another chance to run away. You get to run away from combat and maybe get pursued. You may not alert from security operations. If you're on the road and you get run over, that's your fault. And it is considered a reaction move and does not create reaction moves. And we'll talk about reaction moves because there are other types. If your alert move doesn't do what you want, you can just disperse and your VC unit is removed from the map and you get replacement points increased by the ground combat strength of the units that were involved in it. So a battalion, right? Yeah, a battalion will range from 1 to 3 points. I think there might be 4s in there that you can convert. You can just disappear and get yourself replacement points back, which are things that you can then take as casualties later. I didn't explain that. These guys are worth 6. Other units, not so much. But basically the idea is that the VC can fade away and just disappear their units rather than fight. And they can choose between units. Most of the other units can get involved if there are enemy units near them. If you end adjacent to a unit, if an enemy ends adjacent to a friendly unit which is not in the operation, the friendly unit is allowed to move its full movement point allowance in a reaction move. Operating and target units cannot react. The reaction is voluntary. You don't have to take it. VC units get to disperse whenever they're given this opportunity. And what is it? Enemy zones of control can be entered, as may enemy-occupied hexes, as long as you have the movement points to get away. And you might be forced into an incidental attack, I think. If the VC reacts into an operation's target hex during the first round of the operation, it becomes a target unit and then can do alert movement. Defending units may end reaction movement in a target hex, even if it contains enemy units, and they become target units themselves and are forced to be attacked. Units reacting to a retreat or to a movement of defensive reserves may not end their movement in a target hex. The movement's necessary to trigger a reaction move. As long as an operating unit remains where it is, the reaction movement is not triggered. Thus, holding a patrol operations and bombardment will not trigger a reaction. A given unit can react as many times as it likes. It doesn't make it ineligible. It doesn't give it a marker. And you can react as stacks or thingies. Now, I don't see how many movement points you got here. You get your movement point allowance. I probably said that. Just read it too quickly. Reaction happens before alert. Reaction can't trigger reactions. Okay, combat. Combat can happen between operating units and a target unit. This is the search and destroy model. Between units on a security operation and enemy units on the road that you run over. When a unit is passing through an enemy-occupied hex and is forced to perform an incidental attack, and then the final thing is bombardment attacks, which technically you have to declare an operation to do, but they're weird. Security operations have their own special rules. Incidental attacks are explained elsewhere, and I think they're not always called out where you can do them. And bombardment also has its special rule. So we have just normal combat, which is the search and destroy and its ilk. All the operating units have moved, and any reaction alert movement has been taken, and interdictions placed. The phasing player can attack. All target hexes occupied by operating units must be attacked, and all operating units in a target hex must attack some target hex, not necessarily the one they occupy. The operating units adjacent to a target hex may participate. There's no advantage or disadvantage to attacking from a target hex as opposed to from a hex adjacent to it. Units which are not assigned to the operation may not attack. I'm not sure I agree that there's no advantage or disadvantage. I think the hex sides only affect you if you're attacking adjacent. So, operating units which are not in or adjacent to a target unit do not contribute ground strength to their attack, although they may be able to throw artillery in. Some of the adjacent operating units may attack and not others, as the phasing player desires. And you don't have to use your entire strength in an attack. All target units must defend, however. If any units in the hex are attacked, all must be attacked. And the target hex can only be attacked once per round. You total the attacking strength and the defending strength, and you include any artillery, any firepower, let's call it, and come up with a ratio. Let us find the combat table, because we need this. Oh, fuck. All right, got a break. It's being used as a bookmark. I just grabbed the middle of the rules instead. Okay, so use the combat ratio to get a die roll modifier. We also have 3 to 2 and 2 to 3 ratios, which are the first point there. If the hex only has ground combat strength of 0, the hex then has a ground combat strength of 1. If all the units attacking a given target hex in any manner other than bombardment have a ground combat strength of 0, the attacking units are just automatically destroyed. They shouldn't be doing that. And that could happen like stupid incidental attack or something like that. You probably wouldn't choose that. You also use a die roll modifier based on the terrain type. And where it says RF here, that's a regional force. That's basically local militia that the U.S. player can commit to an attack. And they're kind of cool, actually. Okay. The combat result is, okay, so you roll a die, you add all the modifiers on there, which includes unused pursuit allowance, and I'll explain that in a bit. That we really kind of have to get to the retreat and pursuit rules to understand that. But if you have additional movement points on a pursuit, you get a bonus in combat. Even if you're not pursuing the units you attacked. And then you'll be determining 2 things from the combat: the casualties, which are presented here, and the pursuit allowance, which is presented here. Within the casualties, there's a possibility of air units being damaged. Casualties are a cross-reference of the die roll with each force's strength. So you count the strength points, the ground strength points that you're attacking with, and any enemy artillery that was committed to the attack itself, not to interdiction or whatever. And you'll get a number, and you'll be on that column. And I believe it goes attacker to defender for the values. And you can see, if you can get the number way up there, you can do a lot of damage. Okay. What are the losses? Okay. We haven't hit losses yet. All losses can be absorbed in one of 2 ways, either by taking losses on the units or expending replacement points. Each ground strength point of an eliminated unit or replacement point is going to be 1 point of losses. So if I lose a 6-point unit like this one, that will satisfy 6 of the losses required here. However, I could also use replacement points instead of taking the losses by eliminating units. Free World Ally use US replacement points. Everything else has its own special replacement points. You can divide the losses among nationalities however you like. US replacements may not be eliminated to satisfy losses if the US or Free World Allies aren't present. Yeah, the right group has to be there. You cannot expend replacement points in excess of your force's combat strength. So if you take more losses than the ground strength of the units that you have there, you will have to lose units. Headquarters and artillery have a combat strength of 0. The elimination of either type, though, counts as a point of losses. And they can take a replacement point to cover those losses as well. You may count all losses as being satisfied by eliminating all the friendly units that participated in the battle and were in or adjacent to the target hex. Then you don't need to spend any additional points. And US and VC brigade level units can be broken down to take losses. The US really doesn't want to do that. The VC replacement recovery. If a VC unit takes combat losses less than its current ground strength, the NLF player chooses to eliminate it. They get the difference in losses as an increase in their total replacements. Basically, the unit is dissolving. It is still able to be recruited from. Certain combat results indicate the loss of an air or air mobile point, and those are listed here. If they have an asterisk against them, that will only happen if there's a hot landing, which is something I'll explain a little later. Now, you're only allowed to take those losses if a point of that type is allocated to the operation. But it doesn't have to be part of the given attack that you're rolling for. So you might have air mobile committed to the operation and had moved some units through the air mobile, but not attack directly with those, and you can still lose those helicopters. And same thing with air points, etc. If air mobile losses are indicated but you don't have points on the track to lose them, this is possible with the permanent air mobile units. The US player loses victory points in scenarios or morale in the campaign game. All right. After the combat, any target units surviving the attack are allowed to move their full movement point allowance in any direction. This movement's voluntary. Retreating units can move in any direction. They can move together or split up, whatever. And they can move through enemy zone of control's enemy occupied hexes. They may not end their retreat in an enemy occupied hex that doesn't already have target units in it. There's an interesting thing here, but any hexes occupied by the target units after the retreats are now target hexes, and all the units in them are target units. After all the retreats have been conducted, the operating units can then pursue. Their movement point allowance is determined by totaling the unit's pursuit result from the combat results table, along with their pursuit modifier on the unit counter, which, remember, is this plus number up above the combat strength. And it might be a minus, actually. And it certainly can be zeros. Now, that number can actually be higher than the unit's movement allowance. The defending units do not have to actually move in order for you to pursue. You still get your pursuit allowance. You can pursue. You can pursue out of the target hex. That doesn't happen very often because if you're in a bad battle, you probably get a bad pursuit result and you can't get out of the hex. And then you're in a really horrible situation because you must keep attacking then. And that's not good. Okay. Any points that you have left in a pursuit when you fight the next round, you can add to your combat die roll of any attacks you make in that round. You have to throw your combat strength in. If there's more than one pursuing unit throwing its ground combat in, the lowest pursuit modifier is added to the combat results table, which could be bad. So you might make decisions not to actually attack with all the units that are pursuing. Some units don't have a printed pursuit modifier. They normally can't pursue. However, if they're air mobilized, they may be allowed to pursue. They will have a 0 modifier plus the die roll effect. Population centers. Okay. These are major cities and capitals. I believe they're capital cities only, not capital towns, but I'm not positive of that. They modify the combat die roll just like other training types. However, they also have a special effect. The pursuit result of the first round of combat. Major cities ignore positive pursuit results in the first round of combat. In addition, their initial pursuit allowance is reduced to 0. They will not have a pursuit total on the first round of combat. Capitals are similar, but not identical. They ignore all positive rolled pursuits on the first round, but they keep their innate modifier. And it doesn't say cities in either case, so I'm not sure. It looks like modifier 2 applies to both. Yeah. And it rolled on the first round of operation. Yeah. Capital towns have that as well. Okay. Reserves. Whew, we're getting tired. The U.S. player can call in reserves whenever his units are eligible to pursue or retreat. That allows him to throw more units in. If he's defending against search and destroy, he can activate defensive reserves. Basically, if they join target units, they can become part of the target. They can spark reaction, movement, etc. Offensive reserves, you can call in offensive reserves after the target's retreated. And this is possible in search and destroy, clear, and secure, but not security operations. And you simply add it into the operation, basically. And offensive reserves are not considered when computing the combat pursuit bonus. On later rounds, they'll be considered normally. So they're fresh units. They don't add a 0 pursuit bonus or anything like that to your mix. It's the best actual pursuit bonus you have. So these are just like extra units that you can throw into the battle. Once a unit's been used as an offensive reserve, it is now finished with its operations at the end of this sequence of operations. You may have some trouble remembering which units are involved in the operation. Usually it's a fairly small set. If need be, you can tilt counters and stuff. Multi-target operations. A given operation only starts with one target. However, as the game continues, more stacks can become target stacks, reserves can be thrown in, and you can end up with fights in different areas of the board. They won't be too broadly across the board. Although you could throw in reserves down there and just fire some artillery off or something. If a player chooses the order in which attacks are executed, he can see one attack before deciding whether to attack somewhere else. Ground and artillery strength can only be used once in a round. You use it either on attacks or on interdiction or whatever. A given unit's strength can be divided among different attacks, but each strength point can only be used once per round. Now, the unit could be destroyed before it gets its second attack, and then too bad. If a target hex is not attacked in a given round, those units become uninvolved, and their hex is no longer a target hex, and they can't conduct retreat. They're just out of it. All right, time to swap batteries again. And I think time for me to take a break because my throat's hurting. Now, we're about 12 pages in. Out of a total of 19. So we're a little over halfway the core rules of the game, and that's not bad. I've described some of these additional operations, but we have to go through it a little bit more. I've got to talk a little quietly because it's getting late. Clear and secure. This allows you to do the base operation. This is your attempt to hunt down an attack, and there's no real modifications to it. For holding and patrol, like I said, The way they work is at the end of the operation, you can drop into either the hold or patrol status when you're done. Now, I'm looking here, I believe there's a modifier, which I'm not seeing here. There it is. No. All right. I seem to believe... No, wrong. I'm thinking of clear and secure here. Okay, which we didn't talk about. Clear and secure allows you to drop into hold and patrol. Hold and patrol allows you to just stand still and drop that marker on here. This allows you to move. You do a search and destroy, but your pursuit allowance is reduced by 2 for the duration of the operation, which means you really are not going to be able to fight as well by chasing the enemy. Remember, that pursuit allowance that you get ends up being your modifier to combat. So if you want to kill things, you don't do a clear and secure. Only the US player can do this. You may place into, yeah, okay. You may not use Rangers on clear and secure operations. And Rangers, I don't know if they are available in the normal rules, I think. Okay, secure operation, or security operation. I've kind of already described these. You move along the roads. You use no movement points while you're moving on the road. You're not allowed to leave the road, but you can use your movement point allowance to leave zones of control. After any retreats by defending units, the operating player can withdraw the operating units to the hex from which they entered the hex of combat. These units become uninvolved and may not resume the operation. Other operating units can continue to smash against the defending units if they're still there, or if they've been retreated or destroyed, or whatever, there's no alert, but the operating units can continue their movement, perhaps attacking other enemy-occupied road hexes. Units on security may not exceed their movement point allowances, but they expend movement points only to exit enemy zones of control. Units on security operations may not attack enemy units in adjacent hexes. They can only attack in their own hex, i.e. along the road. I didn't know that was the case. Some of the units on security operations can cease movement and you move others. There's never reaction movement until after the entire operation is completed, at which point you can take a reaction move to get away from the newly moved points. Firepower. I've talked a little bit about how firepower works in combat, but let's go over it. Well, first of all, there's the dedicated artillery. Those are the headquarters units, which have artillery assigned to them, and the U.S. 23rd Division has one. Those can support any operation in which units from that brigade are involved, in which units of that organization are involved. So divisional headquarters and units, the 23rd Division's unit, can support any units that are subordinate to them. The brigade level headquarters can only support the units from which their brigade is on. They can fire in friendly operations any number of times in a turn. So, like a brigade is made up of 3 or 4 units. You can conduct 3 or 4 different operations as long as you're within range of the artillery and keep using it. But the range isn't very high. They cannot support an operation from units not in its command, but you're allowed to assign the artillery or the headquarters or whatever to an operation in order to be able to move it, and then it can get into range or whatever. Independent artillery, most of the regular artillery in the game is going to be independent. This has to be committed to an operation and it can support that operation to which it's assigned. However, if you declare that independent artillery is assigned to an operation and then don't use it, you neither move nor fire with it, it doesn't count against, it doesn't count as an operation completed unit. What that means is that you essentially, anytime you start an operation, you declare all your artillery is involved in it. And then you choose which you actually use. Organic artillery is the stuff built into an actual unit. These, I believe, do not have any range attached to them ever. So they can only actually fire in combat that they're actually involved in. Any type of artillery can support friendly defenses. As long as it's in range, it can do ground support or interdiction. The dedicated artillery, though, the stuff that's attached to a unit command, can only be used in the defense of units under their command, and the organic can only support the unit which actually has it. Artillery has a number of bullets on it. That's how many intervening hexes they can fire through, but they can always fire adjacent or in their own hex. The attacker allocates his artillery and air points before the defender has to allocate any. You can use artillery or air power in incidental attacks. You cannot use naval gunfire, which is another type of this. Now, let's take a look at a ship. It has 2 dots, so it has a range of 2. It has a strength of 6. It's affected by free fire, etc. The U.S. also has the battleship New Jersey, which is significantly stronger and has a longer range. Okay. If you fire in excess of 3 times the unmodified ground combat strength of the units involved, those additional points don't count towards combat ratio. But they do still count on determining the amount of damage, the size of the enemy for damage. So what you want to do is you want to have small units with enough firepower to get them to a good odds table. So you might need more than just one small unit or whatever. And you want to have that heavy firepower be what actually gives you the bonus, gets you to the decent odds modifier, and gets you to boost the enemy's strength. Air power works very similar to the other firepower. You have air points available. Now in the scenario you just have them available. In the campaign you have to actually buy them through reinforcements. Now air points count as artillery. You can use it for bombardment, interdiction, or ground support. You can use them anywhere on the map without range restrictions. You commit it to the operation during support declaration, and no more may be added in the course of the operation. So you can't intervene with additional air points as if the operation is going wrong or whatever, which I think is a little weird, but you can use them as you like for interdiction in battles. The air point is usable during the operation. Each round it can be used once. Even if it causes, through the casualties process, for an air point to be destroyed, that air point is still available for the operation. You don't lose one for that operation. You lose one off your track, which means in a scenario you may not have it for both turns in the season. In the campaign, it's gone. And you have to buy it back or whatever. And there might be a victory point cost in the scenarios. Weather. During the campaign scenario, in the spring, air points and air mobile points are reduced by 1/4 for each turn in the spring. And you get, so there's 2 turns in each season, you get your full air points each time, minus any that you happen to lose or use for something else. Naval gunfire, they can be used once per turn in the season, and they can only be used along the coast, and then they have a range from there. You can also, there's three missions you can use firepower for: ground support, interdiction, and bombardment. Ground support, this increases the combat strength of the enemy force for the combat ratio, increases the losses taken, the column of losses taken by the enemy force, and that's it. Interdiction, this allows you to place these interdiction markers, which can be either 1 or 2. 3 points of gunfire put a 1-point marker in a location. 7 points of gunfire put a 2-point marker. Now remember, free fire affects all of your firepower, so it would take 6 support points to get a 1-point interdiction if you don't have a free fire zone. This is going to be an increase to the cost of the hex. It's in addition to zone of control, terrain, enemy occupied. There's multiple times you can place it, basically before alert or before retreat. After you can interdict hexes with your own units, with enemy units, and it'll affect all units for that round of the operation. I feel like I had a question having to do with this, and I don't remember what it was. There sure are a lot of interdiction counters. Good luck playing that many in one operation. Okay, the final thing is you can declare that you're just going to bombard with something, and you attack something within range, a target hex. You cannot do it against the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's got its own kind of bombardment. You need at least 4 effective after free fire support points in order to do a bombardment, although you can do more. And let's see what you do. No combat ratio is computed. The die is rolled and modified for terrain and casualties determined normally. Yeah, so basically you don't get the combat ratio bonus, but you get to add to the defender and maybe cause some casualties. It doesn't tend to be a good thing. You shoot once and you're done. It's done as a separate operation, I believe. Okay. Yeah. Free fire zones. Like I said, U.S. forces are halved unless there's one of these sitting in the particular province that's involved. Remember, the provincial lines are these white lines. There's going to be an effect to, there's a penalty to doing a free fire zone. Air mobile and riverines. Okay. So, all infantry and headquarters of the 1st Cav and 101st Airborne are air mobile. Other units can be air mobilized, with an exception. You can't air mobilize anything with this little white square as its movement allowance. Other mechanized units that don't have that little white rectangle can be air mobilized. And then we also have riverine points, which works similarly. There's different limits on what can go with them. Let's talk about air mobile. Air mobile units don't pay hex side movement point costs, and they just spend 1/2 of a movement point for each hex they enter, except the last one that they enter. Now they do pay zone of control. So, I'm sorry, I lied, didn't I? No, they are affected by zone of control, interdiction even, because the gunfire, the artillery, there's so much that they have to swerve around and everything. Okay, the landing hex, though, costs 3 if it's enemy occupied or being patrolled by an enemy, 2 if it's a zone of control of a non-patrolling unit, and 1 if there's no enemy unit or zone of control in it. Now, the air mobile unit has the choice of moving either by ground or air mobile movement. It can choose one or the other at its option for the entire round of the operation. It uses foot movement while it's air mobilized otherwise. If you're moving by air and forced into an incidental attack, or if you land in a target hex, your casualties will be higher. The effect of that is these asterisk results can cause more likely helicopter losses. You can actually go choppering around in the ocean, and you can even go off the normal hex grid in the ocean. There are places where that might make sense, down at the very bottom of the map over there. Air mobilizing can be done at any point in the operation or at the start of a reaction move. It's going to cost you points. Now, a battalion or headquarters can be air mobilized with 1 point. Brigades and regiments cost you 3 points. There's no advantage to air mobilizing units that are already air mobile. The air mobile points are used once per turn, and remember, a quarter of them is removed during the monsoon. If you don't have a pursuit allowance, but you're air mobilized, you are allowed to pursue. You now have a pursuit modifier of 0, and you take this into account. Headquarters in U.S. 1st Cavalry and 101st Divisions can pursue only by air. They cannot pursue by ground. And I talked to you about the ground-bound units. Let's talk about riverines. You spend riverine points. These can be done similarly to the air mobile points. Only U.S. ARVN and Free World Allies. 1 riverine point turns a battalion amphibious. They expend 1 movement point to enter marshes. They can ignore minor rivers and water hexsides entirely for all purposes, including combat, but they can't go out to sea. They will remain amphibious for the remainder of the operation, and you can make them amphibious for a reaction move or for a reserve movement, and then it remains it for the operation in progress. The boats are so small that they don't really count against you. They don't have any. There's no negative effect to using them, basically. Air mobile units may be made amphibious, but they are either air mobile or amphibious. That's the one place you can't have the helicopters carrying the boats and the boats carrying the helicopters and all that. But each round of the operation, they can switch. You cannot make independent or dedicated artillery amphibious, nor may any type of unit ineligible for air mobile movement be done. So headquarters can, though, and they're sort of like artillery, which is kind of interesting. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Dedicated artillery. No. Nope. Division and brigade level headquarters are considered dedicated artillery. Yeah, you can't make them amphibious. Brigade level units can be made amphibious for 3 points. And now we talk about the brigade level formations. I talked about this in the initial. Basically, you can break down the big units into their components with or without the headquarters. Look at my initial to see that. You're able to switch between these in the strategic interphase. So, if you screw up your initial deployment and get something you didn't want, you're stuck with it for the turn. VC regiments can be broken down into 3 battalions during the unit status phase. That's again in the interphase. You remove the regiment and you grab 3 random battalions. They'll be in a cup over there. It's not the only thing we use cups for, though. We also drink out of them now. US and VC brigade level units that are deployed in a single counter can be broken down to facilitate loss taking. We've already talked about that. If a brigade is broken down, any component units retain any holding or patrol missions that they have. They also retain their used. If they're used, that wouldn't matter because of when it happens. The number of ARVN battalions are in the counter mix. They can be assigned to a scenario formed by recruitment, but they do not break down. You don't create these by breaking down bigger units. And they can't be combined to form units. All right, I got to swap batteries. And then, I don't know what. I've already largely talked about the limited intelligence. The VC units are normally deployed like this on their backside facing. That way the U.S. doesn't know what he's exactly facing. Political sections have no strength. We haven't gotten into supply conduits. They'll show up in the campaign rules, but they also are face down. They're not allowed to move, from what I recall. Everything else is allowed to alert and react and such not. The important thing is the political sections actually have a zone of control. You cannot put them in holding or patrol missions, though, which means if they're near the road and almost all of the VC units are sitting in a patrol, you might have a pretty good clue as to what are just political sections. And you want to wipe those suckers out, and you can do it very cheap if you know that's what they are. So you might want to be a little tricky and not do the obvious, or the thing that if the US didn't think wouldn't be obvious. I don't know. The ARVN. The ARVN has some special rules. They might be ineffective. Certain forces, divisional or corps level, might be ineffective. They're allowed to react and defend, and they have zones of control, but they cannot force incidental attacks. And their artillery is allowed to fire in support of defending units, if otherwise eligible. They're allowed to strategic move, but they can only do so if they end their strategic movement in a town, city, major city, or cultivated hex, and they're not allowed to cross a national or corps boundary. So you can't make a unit more likely to be effective by shifting it. So that's kind of big. Okay, regional forces. In any combat in which U.S.-controlled forces defend, it's 2 extra strength points defending in a town, city, or major city, and 1 in cultivated terrain that doesn't have those. Regional forces are up to the U.S. to use. They're added to the friendly forces' combat strength when determining combat odds and maximum replacement use. This is important because you can add ARVN units essentially to your battle no matter what, as long as you're in the right terrain. But they don't count when determining your friendly losses. So they're kind of free. They add to your odds charts. They add to the losses you can take. They allow you to take ARVN losses. So they're all good. And there doesn't seem to be any penalty to this because you're using it in defense, so you're not really worried about pursuing the enemy or anything. You can't turn things around right away. They are not considered for maximum artillery or firepower commitment, and you can't take them as losses themselves. Okay, the Rangers. There are these guys, which are the ARVN Rangers. They can be kept in the ARVN Ranger holding box when they're not in use during an operation. If they're anywhere on the board, they increase the cost for the NLF to enter South Vietnamese national border hexes, so something like this. And I think that includes disputed hexes. If there's 3 or 4 Rangers in play, they add 1 to the border hex cost. If they're all 5 are in play, they add 2 to every border hex that's entered. Okay, in search and destroy operations only, you can roll a die to include SVN Rangers. If you roll less than or equal to the number of Rangers in play, you get a number equal to that die roll from the holding box, which you can put in any hexes containing operating units. No more than 1 Ranger can be placed in a given hex. If more Rangers are available than there are hexes with operating units, the excess Rangers may not be placed. Then they're allowed to move, attack, and pursue until the end of the operation, at which point they're removed from the map and go back to their holding box. If they're destroyed in combat, the U.S. has the through any means really, has the option to reduce the ARVN replacement pool by 5 immediately and return it to the Ranger holding box. If he chooses not to expend it, the Ranger doesn't come back, and he's no longer available until he's rebuilt. Now, they're not that good a unit. They add strength points, but nothing else. They can do interdictions and stuff like that, but they're ARVN units, and we're going to put this here because we're done. If we look at the alert die roll, we didn't even talk about this before. If any ARVN units are assigned to the operation, you add 1 to the movement point allowance on an alert. That's bad. And I believe you can't add these later in the operation. Yeah, it's just when you designate. So if you add ARVN Rangers to the operation, you're making the VC more capable of running away. And that's trouble. All right. That is the end of the base rules to the game. This is all you need to play anything except the 2 campaign scenarios. The rest, and that's about half the rules, has to do with the political elements of the game, the unit reinforcement and purchase, the U.S. commitment, stuff like that. Special things like bombing the North and the Trail. All that kind of stuff has its own rules. It's all fairly complicated, and that'll be in the third part of the videos.